Hello and welcome, and congratulations on making it this far through VeeamON. We're nearly there, nearly to the party. I'm Ben Young, Field CTO for APJ, and the man who needs no introduction, but he may as well do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm Michael Cade. I'm also a Field CTO in our strategy team. So all of them fantastic people, including Ben, that were on the main stage, are part of the same group. And hopefully here we're going to unearth some of the information, go a bit deeper into some of the strategies around leveraging Veeam Vault. If you've heard of Veeam Vault, we'll ask some questions as we go through and get some audience participation.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess first up, are any of you using Vault today? Hands up. Okay, good.
Cool.
This will be an introductory section. So let's get into it. First, we're going to go through the Vault overview, just a bit of what it is, how it's a little bit different to some of the other object storage that we have today, but also how it's very similar to what we know and love today and how it integrates into Veeam Data Platform. Then we'll look at the migration strategies, and then a little bit around leveraging the cloud to migrate at the end to add some benefits. We'll cover that later. So Vault overview. So what is Vault? This is our kind of standard marketing slide. Unbeatable price, starting at $14 a terabyte, 2 editions, uncompromising security, and unbelievable ease. Now, what does that really mean? And I really like this table. So comes in 2 editions. We've got Foundation on the left and Advanced on the right, and there's some subtle differences, but there's also some similarities. Geo-redundancy-wise, Foundation is what we call LRS. So obviously all this is built on Azure Blob cool storage today, and LRS is locally redundant. So it says resilient to drive failure here, but the reality is it's obviously a lot more redundant to just a single drive failure. But the durability is less because on Advanced, it uses zone redundancy. So Azure could lose an entire data center within that zone, and you would still have data there available to be serviced. But if you've chosen Foundation and they did actually lose a facility, then there's going to be some data loss. So there's some subtle differences there in terms of where this data is placed, and also where these editions are available, because not all regions that Vault is enabled around the world actually have ZRS, and we've got a world map in a couple of slides, which you'll see, which we'll kind of highlight there.
So I think just before we get on to this, and this is obviously important as well, but just this in general, Vault in general is just another repository. If you're Veeam customers today, Vault is just another repository, right? You've heard just enough OS, just another repository where you can store your data. It's just consumed via a Veeam purchase, and then we look after, we take care of everything under the hood for that.
Yeah, that's right. Then some other differences. Foundation, we've got a fair use policy that wraps over the top. So you can restore up to 20% a year of your total capacity. So when you buy a Vault, you buy a subscription, you buy a total capacity, 1 terabyte, 10 terabytes, 100 terabytes, whatever you need. So under Foundation, you can egress up to 20% of that without breaching the fair use policies. However, where it really is very advantageous on Advanced is obviously unlimited egress, which is unheard of, particularly when your data's in the hyperscaler. Typically, egress is a very significant portion of your cost. People are worried about pulling too much data out, but it also includes all the API transaction costs and things as well. So all of those transactions as we're writing data from Veeam Data Platform up into Vault, all inclusive on the Advanced thing. And I think, yeah, we were talking before about what this actually means. I think a lot of people think about these offsite copies of their data in backup storage as kind of like the last resort. Like I need to grab them because I've lost all my on-premise, I've lost every other piece of data that I have. I need to now restore from them. We know there's going to be a cost. But what this unlocks is a whole heap of other use cases. Actually DR testing, using it, testing your backups, which is obviously something we advocate big on, is testing those backups. This storage happens to be in Azure, right next to a huge compute platform, but not only a huge compute platform, a huge platform that's got a number of other PaaS services that you could attach yourselves to, attach this data to, do some data processing, some data classification, you name it. The possibilities are kind of endless on that.
Yeah, just being able to leverage that from a test and development point of view. Let's see what that virtual machine that potentially lives in a certain hypervisor on-prem today, let's see what that actually looks like in an Azure VM. Let's see what we can do with that data and how do we leverage that data versus it just being a dumping ground until something bad happens. Like, let's start leveraging that data. And if you've been with Veeam for a while, you've heard us say about things like Veeam Data Labs, the data integration API. These are all available from that repository, like any other repository, and being able to unearth or get something out of that data, glean some insight out of that.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the TLDR there is we've done a really good job of negotiating this contract globally with Microsoft wherever these vaults are deployed. So leverage it is the key point there. Locality is the other big one. Largely for US-based customers, at the moment this will change as we have Vault in more regions. But Foundation, you just specify the country. So if you need your data to reside in the United States, you'll select that. Vault, the Veeam Data Platform, will actually present you with the default region that's currently landing in. And it will tell you where it's going to go, but it's fixed. So if you need to be on the East Coast and the current default is on the West Coast and you're planning on leveraging this for your DR, that could be potentially an issue for you. Whereas on Advanced, you actually get to choose the specific data center that your data lands in. So particularly for DR use cases where you want to be closest to your data, that's where your office is. That's where you'd kind of go down the advanced path. But largely, if you don't care, if it's just an offsite copy that you want to leverage and run some things on, you're not too worried about the locality, then Foundation is perfectly applicable for that. The next one's a biggie. We've probably all configured object storage of some description. Did you remember to create the bucket with object lock when you created it? Did you remember to enable encryption on those backup jobs that's writing data into that? With Vault, that takes all of that away. It's already got all those defaults set in from day one, so it's always going to have object lock. But you actually can't, from a Veeam data standpoint, write data into there unless it's immutable, unless it's encrypted. So industry best practice, zero trust, kind of all that stuff.
I think one thing to add there is that that encryption method, that's exactly the same as what you do with Veeam backup and replication today. You hold on to those keys. You're not giving them to us at all. They're for you to open the door and get into your data that is just stored in that Veeam storage, that Veeam Vault.
Yeah. So where is it available? Here's where the core regions are. You can see there's a lot of choice around the globe at the moment. There's obviously a lot of requests from other regions that don't have this today. So I'd really suggest you take that out through your normal channels in country, because that helps us decide, where is the pipeline, where should we deploy the next regions, talk with Microsoft and get those deployed. So if you are planning on using it, you're not in any of these countries, then yeah, please do make sure that you talk to your local Veeam rep and get the feedback through to the VDC team on that. And so you can see there's lots of little F&As. That's the Foundation and Advanced mode. And as you can see from the US map, largely that's the only kind of region at the moment that really it's advantageous to be able to select your region, because you'll be kind of placed, if I'm going to Australia East, or if I want to be in Australia, there's only one option down there at the moment, and it's similar for a lot of other regions. And then from a non-core region availability, you'll see some of these only have Foundation, because that's the facility that Microsoft has there doesn't have that zone, that triple mirror kind of facility there, so we can only offer Foundation in those zones. So yeah, available in lots of places, which is really good. It gives you choice. Architecture-wise, not too dissimilar. As we've kind of said, this is just effectively object storage that we know and love today. It bolts directly into VDP, which is fantastic. But I think one really key thing here that I've been talking to a lot of customers about is the storage account actually sits in a fully managed environment within Veeam Data Cloud. So it's kind of another layer of separation, from a potential cyber event. Those storage accounts live out there. If they happen to compromise your Azure side of things, they can't then get into those storage accounts and try and mess around with some settings, maybe disconnect you, maybe disrupt you from actually recovering. Although the data might be immutable there, they could still potentially kind of disrupt operations and dampen your time to recovery. So environment-wise, your normal environment then just connects in over the internet into the blob, which is kind of the vault that gets provisioned at the end. But the storage account and everything that kind of provisions all that sits within Veeam Data Cloud. Use cases, I guess there's a couple of course you could use it for a copy job, put it into Foundation. Advanced, you could definitely go direct. It's fast enough, and obviously the no egress and no API transactions, all inclusive is advantageous. But equally, things like scale-out backup repositories, which is what we'll talk a lot about here today, perfect for that sort of stuff. Add it as your extent, grow into there, buy the best, fastest storage you can for your performance tier on-premise, and then scale out to get your kind of longer-term retention that's available online, and blend both of those products kind of together. So yeah, just a couple of examples of where you might use some of these.
So I think this is the important here, that this is one choice that you get in terms of that foundation advanced. Just because we say copy job, that doesn't mean that you're locked down to that. Just remember that you're going to get, the performance isn't going to be as fast. It's not going to give you the same redundancy or resiliency on that data. But you could ultimately use either of these for direct to object. Equally, you could use both of them for copy jobs as well.
Exactly. Anywhere you can use object storage today in VDP, you can leverage Vault.
And both as well. So that last slide, we still follow that same 3-2-1 type methodology. Get that first copy of data offsite, air-gapped, immutable. But equally, you might have a secondary copy for a much shorter term retention in another Vault.
So how it's added. If you've ever added object storage before, typically you'd go to your provider, they'd give you some access keys and access secrets. You'd add those credentials to your Veeam platform. Then you'd go through and go through the kind of object storage wizard, which obviously has a few of those hyperscalers front and center, and or the kind of other S3 compatible wizard. Vault's a little bit different. It's kind of secured end to end. So there's actually a wizard now within Veeam Data Platform 12 where you'll actually spin up and go, I need to add Vault. That's another repository type. And what actually happens is this is where we start actually communicating with my.veeam.com. This knows what subscription you have. And this is where you'll actually manage your storage vaults. So when you do this, it actually creates an Enter ID application. This forms the first part of kind of the authentication between your environment and us. It adds an application registration in the background as well. And then most importantly, when that's kind of all done, those first few steps, then the VBR server itself actually creates a certificate and it sends it back to us, and that's what we assign through to the storage account, and that's what we then leverage for authentication going forward. So no more access keys, no more copying and pasting things, storing those in a vault. All the authentication is done through here, and it's also managed, and you can see exactly what VBR instances are connected to your my.veeam.com through the Veeam Data Cloud portal. So all of those will be coming through to one UI. At the moment, it's a slightly separate portal, but over the next kind of quarter-ish, you'll see all of those workloads then be presented through one UI. So if you are leveraging other Veeam Data Cloud products and services, you'll see your vaults alongside your M365s and Entras and whatever else you have there.
The two things to mention here, that Enter ID logo there, that's the Veeam Data Cloud Enter ID. So it's not your Enter ID. So it gives you that capability. Also, from a shared technology, you've probably heard that mentioned a few times over the last couple of days. If you've ever used Veeam Backup for Azure or Azure Blob storage, you've already gone through a similar workflow in terms of an enterprise application, but that application ID or enterprise application would be in your Enter ID at that point. So a very shared technology. The wizard-driven approach looks exactly the same. And we're actually we'll show some screenshots to show what it looks like in VBR as well.
Absolutely. And then today you've got your Vault. I missed one slide. So as I mentioned before, when you buy Vault, you buy a subscription. You don't actually buy like an individual Vault. You buy a subscription, which is your right to consume up to so much storage. And of course, there's the ability to kind of burst past that. And we've got systems in place to kind of do true ups in different quarters and things, which we're not going to get into because we don't want to talk about billing. However, you then create vaults, and you can kind of configure things the way that you would like. If you would like environment 3 to be connected, for example, to its own vault and nothing else is written in there, absolutely fine. If you want environment 2 to be writing to its own vault as well as connected to vault number 1, perfectly fine. And then as storage vault 1 at the top there, there's a storage vault that is your single vault, and then you've got folders in there which separate out your environments, also perfectly fine. So the flexibility is there. A bit of a side tangent, service providers are also looking at how they can leverage this as well. And we run through the same slides here around how do they architect it, how are they going to have the subscription, and where are they going to put the data. So yeah, you can leverage Vault in any way you like. One vault's fine, many's also fine.
So Ben, them storage vaults, can they be in different regions?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
When you create a vault, you can select your region.
And each one of those storage vaults can be LRS or ZRS, or does that depend on what the subscription
is tied to the quantity. That's right.
I've learned something. Yep. Cool.
Yeah. Hopefully it was right. So that's kind of an overview of Vault, right? How you can buy it, how you can provision it, how it all connects in through VDP. Hopefully that was all relatively straightforward. Now, a lot of us are already leveraging object storage, I hope, with immutability and encryption things. So how do we get data into there? If you want to start leveraging Vault today, what do we do with the data that we already have And there's a few kind of strategies for that. Obviously, strategy number one is to just let it age out. If you've only got a small amount of data and it's a nominal cost to have it sit there for 30 days, 90 days, then do that. You don't have to do anything then. You just kind of let it age out, and we'll talk through how we do that within Veeam Data Platform. Obviously, if you've got a lot of data there, multi-year, or it's costing a lot of money, then we need to think about how we're going to get the data into Vault so that we can retain that retention. We don't want you to lose retention just because you want to leverage Vault. So letting it age out, obviously, as it says there, perfect for shorter-term capacity, tier extents, or where your additional cost is nominal. And that's kind of roughly how an environment might look, right? You've got your backup server with a repository, and it's connected out on object. The green boxes here kind of represent our restore points. What we then do is we then go through that wizard. We buy a subscription for Veeam Data Cloud Vault. We add the Vault through that wizard. We then have a Vault available. And then in our capacity tier, we seal that extent. And then when the new backup jobs run, it'll obviously run a full, and we'll start then running incrementals or whatever you've got set on your job, and it'll build up.
So I think also important, because I imagine some people in the room, well, I don't have object storage for that 714 30-day type retention on-prem, and that might just be a Linux box. It might even be the hardened Linux repository, and you might want to keep that, or maybe that is what you're trying to get rid of. It might be a dedupe device. It's just another repository. So we've got the same capability of sealing that, stopping that, and starting a new, fresh, active chain in Veeam Data Cloud Vault as well.
That's right. So data's going to move across, and the cool thing is, because it's all still online, you can still recover from these other restore points that are there. So depending on, like if it is 90 days, you probably not want to go without backups for 90 days. So because it's online, it's just sealed. It just means Veeam Data Platform is not going to write any more data into the other repository that you had there. And then you'll start building up your retention on the other side. Then when you've built up your retention, you can obviously remove that extent, delete the object storage if that's what you have with the other provider, or get rid of the hardware on premise, wherever that is. And then you're up and running with Veeam Data Cloud Vault, much in the same kind of configuration that you had before. So obviously the benefits are, it's simple, right? We just add the new one, start running in there, and then kind of blow away the other one, which is fantastic. It's all managed through the Veeam Backup and Replication Console, a tool that we know today, very well documented, very well proven, how we seal extents and things. It's been in the product for a very long time. This is nothing new because of Vault. This is a core capability of backup and replication. And then, as I've already talked about, it can be used for restores while we're aging it out, and then, yeah, we delete it. So then things get a little bit trickier. What if my data is out in another hyperscaler or another cloud provider that charges me egress? What if there's a lot of data? There's a lot of things to kind of consider here, particularly on the egress side of things, right? Because what we're actually talking about here is now migrating the data. So what's going to happen there is we're going to read every single object out of that bucket, and if you've got 2 petabytes there, trying to move it into Veeam Data Cloud, that's going to be a significant cost. But also, when we start thinking about it, that's also like a lot of data to transfer over a network. So we need to start sort of planning for these things, depending on how much data you have in your repositories. So again, this kind of represents a very basic form of what you might have. Obviously, there'd be probably a lot more green boxes here if you were going to go through a migration strategy. But let's just assume that this is a large amount of data. Very similar process, register the Vault, get that all up and running in our backup and replication environment. And then we put this into maintenance mode. That means nothing will be able to obviously write into here. We're locked in, and then we basically evacuate the backups. And so what then will happen is Veeam will handle the moving of that data in the background. It's going to start basically copying everything over, and then it will tell you once it's run through the migration of that data from your old into your new Veeam Data Cloud Vault. So they've now moved across, and then much like the other process, we can then get rid of whatever it was of our source kind of repository there, which is pretty cool.
I'm just going to re-emphasize, obviously, if that source or the original repository is in a cloud provider that charges egress, and you're going to lift and shift a large amount of data, it's likely that it's going to cost you money if there are egress charges on top of that. I think that's important just to settle. However, there's another 2A that we can touch on in a second to potentially help.
Exactly. So obviously what to watch out for. Egress fees, we'll reiterate it again. I don't want you to go off and go on a migration strategy and then say, Ben, we just got a $7,000 bill for migrating a bunch of data out. Egress fees, yeah, they stack up. So be careful, make sure you know what you're in for wherever it currently is. And check with your provider too, because some of the providers, depending on which region you are and who you're with, actually have programs to kind of apply for and at least be able to get the data out. So check what you've got available if they do have egress fees that they charge. And if you're using a provider that doesn't have any egress, then that is not necessarily a consideration. However, probably a consideration for everyone is load on your internet connection. Now remember, if we're migrating, that means we're reading everything out of the source. And if that's over the internet, it's probably going to come down as fast as your internet connection will support. And we don't want to disrupt everyone during the day and their office jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So plan for this, because it's not only going to pull it down, but it's also then going to have to push it up. So both inbound and outbound on your internet connection is going to take a really big hammering. So plan accordingly. Which is kind of a nice sort of segue into using the cloud to migrate, right? So the strategy here, it largely just pins along, we want to migrate the data. And so what we can do is we can leverage Azure, in this case, to handle a data mover. And what that basically entails is we can leverage their high-speed internet connections, their temporary infrastructure, and a real big bonus here is if your Azure Blob, if your source repository blob is within the same availability zone as your Veeam Data Cloud Vault that you provision, there's no egress fees because Microsoft don't charge egress between AZ. So if both of those storage accounts, and I'll just say that again, both of those storage accounts exist in the same location, then Microsoft will not charge you egress fees to pull it out of that blob and put it into Veeam Data Cloud Vault. So this is largely what it looks like. This might have been our Veeam environment before. Backup server on the left, scale-out backup repository, classic. Connected over the internet, obviously, putting it into our own managed Azure Blob. Nice and simple. During migration, however, we need to spin up a few more things to make this happen. So we need a couple of things. We need private connectivity to Azure. If you've already got an express route, you could route over that. I happened, during this kind of demo that I put together, I created a VPN tunnel. I created a network gateway on the Azure side. I connected my Fortinet up to that. I could then privately route to a network in Azure. Then I could spin up this virtual machine here, which is obviously right next to our storage. And then we then set, which you'll see in a second, we set the gateway of this blob account to be this new machine that's sitting in Azure. So the data is going to read straight from that private machine that we've just provisioned from our blob, and then we're going to push it into Veeam Data Cloud Vault, which will leverage all of Microsoft's internet, all of their infrastructure, all of their networking, all their routing. It just stays there. We haven't had to pull it all the way back on-premise and then push it all the way back into Veeam Data Cloud Vault. And this is largely what it looks like. So this was my temporary gateway server. I had a pretty nominal amount of data to move. But even on this 2 vCPU machine, I was getting around 600 megabits a second, which is pretty good. There's been, actually, since I put this together, a few people messaged me saying, make sure you enable hardware accelerated networking or whatever it's called in Azure. And they've done a lot more tests and actually fed back some more since I put this together late last year. But yeah, it can be anything. A Windows machine that you can connect to Veeam. You obviously import it through the normal way that you would normally import a machine into Veeam. It deploys the required services, and then it's selectable as a gateway server for your blob. And that's what it looks like. So obviously we go to backup repositories on the left. We then go and find, we edit our storage repository here. And the key thing here is the connection mode. So you see down the bottom, it's not using the default, I think it's called direct, which is what it'll say. We actually specifically choose that server that we provisioned in Azure. So in this case, mine didn't have a nice DNS name. It was just 10.10.04. So that means whenever this object storage repository is used, it uses that as its gateway server. And it can then, all that internet traffic is routed through that machine. So then we evacuate the backups, and this is how we do it, right? If you've ever seen an extent, this is me putting my blob, so Azure CHC Lab Sober 1. That was my, representing my source where I want to migrate from. And so we put that into maintenance mode. We then evacuate the backups. And you can see on that machine, this is a screenshot of the task manager that I had from that Azure machine itself. It spins up and runs. yeah, really good throughput. You can see it's pretty symmetrical, reading all that data out and pushing it back in. And if you look at the top, it was actually pretty CPU bound. I'm pretty sure that's why it wasn't going faster. In fact, someone messaged me last night saying they had around 800 on a slightly bigger machine. So you can definitely get the throughput as you need, but plan accordingly. You might need to scale multiple of these out if you're trying to migrate multiple extents. They might need to be slightly bigger machines, but yeah, even on modest hardware, pretty good. And it's traffic that didn't need to come through your on-premise network, which I think's even more exciting. And then the cost, right? Like even for a couple of days, I had that hardware, the security gateway, all that stuff spun up. It was, you know, I think it was, yeah, whatever it is, not many dollars, like under $10 to have it kind of running per day for all that infrastructure. But the key thing here is down at the bottom, bandwidth, $0, which is pretty cool considering I pulled out a few hundred gigs of data out of a blob and put it into Vault, and it all moved very, very quickly, which is great. And then after migration, we just revert everything back. We can get rid of all that temporary infrastructure, we tear down the VPN, remove all of our routes, whatever we've done to sort of set up that temporary infrastructure. And then we just, we change that extent back to direct mode, and then it's just gonna go over our internet, and we're all back to the races, we're all up and running, which is great. We're well ahead of time here.
Yeah.
So to recap, a few things. Obviously, it's easy to use Veeam Data Cloud Vault in your environment today. There's nothing special we need to do. It's already a first-party supported service. It's just we add it in a slightly different way. It's object storage under the hood. We can make sure that it's immutable and encrypted. Everything is configured the way that we want, but largely this isn't a foreign thing to any of us. We should be all pretty familiar now with object storage, and it bolts directly into VDP, which is great. It's got many use cases, secondary copies, part of a capacity tier, primary backups, you name it. Really good use case could be an edge kind of use case where you don't want a lot of storage on premise and you're just writing directly to Vault as your object repository, which would be pretty great.
I think, Ben, like just to reiterate again, one, it's just a repository, but two, if you have gone through like on-prem storage procedures to purchase on-prem enterprise storage to store those backups in, Vault becomes an option, not only to store that data in, but now I don't have to look, or you don't have to look after the maintenance of that physical hardware piece. You're just going to see a dumping ground for your backups to be able to store it there. And then the important thing that we'll double down on again is around being able to leverage that data alongside cloud services. So being able to use those native services within Azure to get something from that data. We're all backing up stuff that we probably don't need to be backing up. So we can be smarter about that. We can go and use that data that we're now storing in a Vault, hook it up to some of the services within Azure, glean that information that then allows you to be more hygienic back at the backup source. So understanding, I don't need that anymore. That's not been used for X amount of time. Just do some data mining against that, some classification against that data to be able to understand a little bit more about that so that we're streamlined when it comes to leveraging that data, but also protecting it.
Yeah. Again, to build on that point of reuse, like sure backup, leverage it. We've all got plans to DR somewhere, wherever that might be. How often do we test that? We've got desires for an RTO of X. Can we even meet that? Have we tested that? Do we know how long that takes to actually restore that data out of that bucket, out of that storage repository, and into Azure or into wherever it happens to be that you go? Like there's a fully valid use case here that you could pull the data back out of Vault. There's no egress to actually test this back on premise. Test this on your DR site. Test this on a third-party cloud provider, however it is that you're wanting to do this. There's no egress fees, no API transactions on Advanced. So yeah, use it.
I'm going to completely contradict exactly what I just said about having on-prem storage, because what you could do with those egress charges or lack of egress is actually use now your enterprise storage that you've purchased on-prem to be able to bring back a backup copy job back on-prem. So now you've got a longer term retention or just a copy of that data. So now we've got multiple copies, one in Vault, which is potentially your go-to if you need to recover, and your DR becomes Azure at that point. But equally, I've got a copy close by to me that I can quickly recover from as well. So there's lots of different options to this. Again, it's just a repository.
Yeah.
I think another thing to mention here is we haven't touched, I know everyone else has touched about VBR Linux, VBR Windows. Nothing changes. It's still just another repository. It's still going to be, you just add it. Like you're just going to leverage it as a repository.
Exactly. Use your data. We won't labor that point again. Yeah, and then obviously choose your migration strategy that's going to work for you. I think it should be pretty clear cut. You'll know in your own self, like if you've got lots of data you need to move, then you're probably going to need to come up with some form of migration strategy. If you've got a strong desire to use Vault and exit wherever you currently are, we're going to need to work out how to get there. So there may be a cost associated if you just can't get around those egress fees. But equally, if it's a short retention time, then just let it age out. It's a perfectly fine use case. We don't need to migrate everything. And then, yeah, to really hit home about this, like use the cloud. As you've seen, like even on that modest repository moving a few hundred gig, like the storage can be driven that fast. Can your internet connection handle that? Can your resources be tied up for that long? So leverage the cloud. It might cost you a few dollars in resources, but it can just be deleted at the end. And for tens, if not sort of hundreds of dollars, depending on how many resources you need and for how long, you can use that to migrate the data. And I can guarantee you Microsoft's internet connections are a lot faster than anything we've got.
I think that's massively important. So if you think about the scale out backup repository and you've got a performance tier that lives on-prem, you've got a capacity tier that maybe it lives in Azure, maybe it lives somewhere else. Equally, we have that copy mode as well to be able to copy that and stream that into an Azure Blob. And at that point, that may, depending on, again, the egress, the warning shots, the egress costs might not enable you to do that, but you could hit an Azure Blob at that point as well. Got to be careful where I stand here.
Yeah, don't fall through there.
Definitely going to fall through.
On camera too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and obviously if you're on Blob, then same AZ, you kind of get around the egress, which is a nice added bonus. So I guess the question is, like, where should we Vault next? Either a region or, like, are there any strong desires for other cloud? We can either raise hands now, but like I said, get in touch. Certainly from the regional perspective, like the local teams really want to hear from you and your interest for Vault. So if you have those desires, make sure you raise it up through that team. Talk to someone this week about it, and we can see what we can do about getting those Vaults provisioned in other countries mostly. US is pretty well covered. So yeah, where we can Vault to next. Any kind of questions? We've got a little bit of time. We're a little ahead schedule. Yeah.
When the keynote, I saw up on there, Veeam Vault Archive. Can you explain a little bit about what the ETA on that is for getting to market, how that's going to incorporate with this product?
Yeah, I don't have any direct information on that yet. So there'll be, yeah, when that's kind of finalized, what that actually is and when it's going to be kind of GA, we'll kind of release that. That's kind of on a slightly more forward-looking roadmap. But yeah, that's something that's being looked at. And you probably would have also noticed I forget what the terminology was, but it was effectively multi-provider Vault or something to that effect. So we are looking at other providers to deliver the same Vault service. We realize that not Azure is everyone's, first port of call. They might have, data in AWS or other providers that they want to write data into. And so we are looking genuinely at other providers globally that we can have the same thing. And largely it's partly a commercial discussion because we need to come up with terms so we can try and deliver a very similar product in terms of no egress, no API transactions. And then, yeah, it will just bolt straight into VDP. We'll have a similar registration wizard, etc. So that's kind of the plan at the moment. There's no formal announcement here to say it's going to be available on cloud provider Z, but there is a strong desire to have more choice available for you, as well as more choice from the products. So at the moment, VDP, BNR can only write into, there's only integration with Vault from VDP, but there's desires for our other products, which obviously support object storage as well, to be able to leverage those same Vaults to write their data into. But again, no kind of formal announcement on that, but that's kind of where we're heading. All of our products, or at least some of our products, should be able to leverage Vault wherever that resides in the hopefully short to medium term. Yeah. So I guess that's all. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when you're buying Vault, is there do you buy this on an annual agreement? Is it flexible? Can it change? Can you scale it up or down, kind of month to month? Or?
Yeah, I've got some of the answers. Some of the more tricky, like scaling it down, I think no. But check with your local rep on that. So when you buy, my understanding is when you buy Vault, you buy a subscription and it's annual. When you burst through that, like if you buy a 10 terabyte and then you all of a sudden need 12 terabytes, kind of halfway through that term, there's provisions to obviously allow you to do that. And there's some true-up system at the commerce layer to kind of allow you to kind of pay an overage, amount for whatever that was. And then my guess is at the end of the subscription term, you then negotiate your new one for 12 terabytes. So that's how that works. I don't think you can go down, and I think edition changing also is not supported. But I'll come see me afterwards. I'll grab your details and I'll find out the ins and outs of it, and I'll send it to you.
I think that's important to just double down on that a little bit more. Is that like say you take a 10 terabyte Vault and your next backup is going to take you over that. Hopefully you've been flagged. Hopefully there's some observability stuff that's happening and telling you this beforehand. But if that does, we're definitely not going to stop you having a good backup. There is going to be, we will extend that. We will get you a good backup into that storage. And then afterwards, we'll come knocking on the door.
That's right.
There you go, exactly that.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that we're not just going to give you a big red mark on that backup. We don't have enough storage. Hopefully there's going to be warning signs saying you're very close to, there will be capacity warning signs, say in the days leading up to that, but there's a fair, you can go over that. We're not going to stop you having good backups.
Yeah, I guess the subscription is kind of like a minimum commit, right? You can then burst into that, and then there's, like I say, provisions and systems in place to capture any of the overages to make sure that it's being fair everywhere.
I can actually help clarify that. Luckily, you got a Veeam manager in the house here.
Lovely.
So, for procurement, right? If you're going to go through a traditional reseller route, you have annual subscriptions that you can purchase, and when you need to add capacity, we actually have expansion SKUs. So easy to add on through your reseller. You can actually purchase direct from Azure Marketplace, either on an annual or monthly subscription. If you decide to go the monthly route, that will collect overages. So if you buy 5 terabytes and say a month later you have 6, we will capture those additional terabytes, and then you will see a bill at the end of that month for your overage. So very easy to scale. Either way you go.
Good stuff.
You're welcome.
Nice. Well, that was lucky.
Yeah. Once Vault is deployed, do I have the option to set the region to another region?
Once it's deployed, so
I use it for 6 months. I don't know, and my customer needs to relocate or have that Vault in another region.
So that goes back to, I guess, another migration strategy in that you could absolutely, that same process that Ben showed where the object storage was one side and you put that into maintenance mode and then you open up another Vault and then you can migrate over into that new region. But you would have to go through and select it like a new repo and send that over.
Okay. I have 2 more. Is it possible?
Yeah.
Yeah. We are a distributor for Central America and Caribbean, but we have this a customer that requests for a Vault located in Switzerland. But after look to the data sheet, the Switzerland has an condition like in advance something. I don't know. Is kind of for the availability zones or anything.
So I guess while Ben is flicking back there, I think like we're beholden at this point from a Microsoft point of view in the capabilities that they expose to us. Like we said in the first couple of slides, is that this is Azure Blob storage. So if that LRS, ZRS are not available, then we're tied at that point. And I guess that comes down to absolutely us pushing on Microsoft for that perspective as well, but then equally from you guys and all of our customers, partners, disties, etc.
Great, understood.
So from the Switzerland point, this is one of these zones that obviously I'm not familiar with Azure regions, certainly in Europe, as you can tell from my accent. But the Switzerland North is just a foundation one, so they mustn't have the right level of redundancy there. So you can only buy the foundational side of things there.
Great. And the last one is when we see the document, it says core and non-core. Yeah. When you see the data sheet or
Yep.
the options, what is related to core and non-core options? If it's possible to explain it.
I actually don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, core is pretty much data centers that are a lot more expensive to run. So those, core is going to be the easier maintained, less expensive data centers. So that's where those are all the easy ones to access. The non-core regions, those data centers, depending on where they sit, cost a lot more to maintain. So if you choose a non-core region, the cost is going to be higher because of that.
Great.
So just to clarify for the recording as well and summarize that, is that basically these aren't our terminologies. These are going to come from Microsoft in regards to their data centers and their regions and what is core and what's not.
Thank you very much.
So I will say this map is a little old. I'm a Vault solution engineer for East and Central US. We actually are adding a couple sites in Canada, and we're adding a couple in Japan currently, and there's more coming. So negotiations, like they said, are ongoing. We're adding regions. Also, I would like to go back to that vault to vault question that you had, because you talked about migrating from one vault to another vault. You can obviously deploy as many vaults as you need wherever you need them, because you're just paying capacity. It is immutable though. So yes, you can copy data, but we can't delete it from the original vault. So migration's not always the best answer.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Depending on what your immutability looks like, right? So
I guess I guess that comes down to a retention. If you've got 7 years worth of retention, you want to move that over. That's not getting deleted from the source. So
you end up paying for it twice. if you copy it
exactly
to a
that.
second
Yeah,
bucket,
that's a
right?
very good.
So be careful with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yep.
Nice. Any last questions before we kind of let you go 5 minutes early? You're nearly there. Oh, yep.
Cool. We'll be around for 5 minutes as well. So any questions?
I've got
that you
one.
wanna come up?
So if you're a Vault customer, how do you manage, for example, keeping track of your ingress and egress amounts? Is that in the Veeam portal? You have to use VeeamON, you have to use VBR?
Just add like just so,
So
you
for
can,
example, like there's a fair use policy. How do you know, like if you have an Azure account, right, you can log into your Azure, you can see your transit. How would you do that if you're a Data Vault customer?
Yeah, I think you get overage alerts, right? For the actual overages themselves. Yeah.
So once you hit 75%, you'll start getting alerts that you're reaching capacity. So it's an email that comes back to you on the subscription.
And what about the bandwidth? That's like if they breach the fair use bandwidth restore policy on Foundation?
Yeah, currently there is no, so in the Vault dashboard, there is no like egress monitoring at this moment. I don't know what's coming, but potentially, I mean, you maybe could use VeeamON. I'm not sure if there's a report that would kind of cover that for restorers. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll follow up with the VDC team on that to see what the plans are when Vault moves over to One UI, which we talked a little bit about today. All of those functions that we're talking about here in the current kind of Vault dashboard will move, and I'll check what plans they have around reporting specifically around egress, because that's a good point.
Right. Thank you.
Cool.
Nice one.
I have to shoot because I've got another session.
Right, 2 minutes 33 early. Thank you for joining us.